Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, March 22nd, 2018. This is Budget Committee of the Board of Education in Nashua, New Hampshire. We are located in the North Boardroom. Mr. Guarino, could you please call the roll? Time is, we're beginning a little late. We had some technical difficulties. 6:46 p.m.
Mr. Mosher is not present. Mrs. Oden?
Here.
Mr. Kaufman?
Present here.
Ms. Raymond?
Here.
Ms. Timmons is not present. Ms. Hohensee?
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Here.
Mr. Guarino is here. We have 6 members. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to address the fact that we moved the meeting from last night to tonight based really on the weather forecast, which turned out to be a bust. We really got very little snow, but we tried to make the best decision given the information that we had. So we now know there are 2 members who are not here, Ms. Timmons and Mr. Mosher, both whom attended last night. Dr. Mosley's not here. He had a previous commitment. I decided to continue the meeting because that's what we do. We have a 9-member board. A quorum constitutes 5 people. We have 6 tonight. The concern that some members expressed that Dr. Mosley's not here, I just want to remind everybody that Dr. Mosley has attended every one of these budget meetings that we've had. He's presented his budget twice to us, in the very beginning and then the last time we met with the public comment evening. Along with that, Mr. Donovan has been here each time, and as far as more intimate knowledge of the budget than anyone, I would argue, Mr. Donovan, he's got probably most of it in his head anyway. So with that, I think it's appropriate that we continue, and I guess I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask Mr. Donovan. Hopefully they can be answered tonight. If not, we do have additional meetings scheduled. I think there's something in the budget that addresses Brentwood bonding contingency. Does that need to be pulled out, or can that sit there because the whole Brentwood thing is still in a work in progress?
Yeah, there's no Brentwood bonding in the operating budget. Any bonding would be outside the operating budget.
Okay. So the Brentwood amount that we currently have allocated, plus that, I think it was an additional 25,000.
Yes.
That's all inclusive. That's the operating budget as far as we're concerned. There's no outliers relative to Brentwood other than those 2 items. Is that right?
There's approximately $150,000 for rent related and operating expenses related to Brentwood.
Okay, thank you. And that's in the superintendent's budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Another question, I was looking at the description about 8 paras. This is the text that was on the slides that you gave us the other day, where it was 8 paras per 2K classes. So when I read that and I try and understand it correctly, let me see if I can interpret it and tell me if it's the intent. Does that mean we want 4 paras in each class, or we want, I guess, please, my recollection was that not all kindergarten classes had 2 paras, and that we wanted to correct that through this budget cycle. So if you can jump in.
Okay, actually, if we have less than a half a para per kindergarten class at this point in time. Adding those paras brings the ratio, now it depends on the school, but if there's 4 kindergartens, you would have 2 paras. If there were 2 kindergartens, you'd have 1 para. If there were 3 kindergartens, you'd probably have 2 paras. So the minimum would be a half per kindergarten class.
Okay, so this request for paras is intended to put a half of para in each kindergarten class district-wide?
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, minimum half para. And I did have one other question just to confirm, because it just came up in a conversation I was having. Do we use an outside firm to submit our Medicaid reimbursement requests.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And they're paid out of the money, they get a percentage of what gets paid back to us. That's very common in the industry. Right?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly
so it's
what-
insurance providers, that's very routine out in the real world.
Yeah, we have a contract in place. I think in the budget, there's $150,000 to cover the cost of the approximately 1.7 to 1.8 million that we receive each year.
Okay, thank you. I have a note to send the phone numbers for these machines to everybody in case they don't have it. Do we know, is it in the book? You said that Mr. Fahrenkopf had updated the list and sent out. Do we know if a copy of that memo is in our, our meeting notes book?
I don't know that.
Okay, so I'll just follow up and send the phone numbers to the board and ask that they be placed in the notebook. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Van Twyver to look at making a motion to bring the budget forward.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the proposed superintendent's budget for 2019.
Second?
Ms. Hohensee seconds. Okay. So typically what we do at this point is we look at the budget and we offer modifications, changes to the budget.
You need to
And we go,
vote.
I'm sorry, oh, sorry. Thank you, Ms. Van Twyver. Can we please vote on that? All right, yes, second, oh, no, well, this was discussion.
Oh, okay.
I thought, point of order, I thought we amend it now, and then we vote on it at the end when it's all fully amended.
We
adding this.
accept the superintendent's budget, then it becomes our budget, and then you can,
Then you make
Okay.
amendment,
Fine, thank you.
and then ultimately gets approved by the whole board.
at least that's the way I remember it. Hey, Mr. Donovan?
Yeah, I think the term that's frequently used is place the budget on the table.
Thank you very much.
That's what you're basically doing, and then you're free to make changes.
So, do we need to
We need to
rephrase?
accept it first, and then we place it on the table. Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, I think you can do that with one motion.
Accept and place.
Place it on the table. So I move to accept the proposed superintendent's budget for 2019 and to place it on the table.
Second. Okay.
I'm just slightly confused about the language still, because isn't putting something on the table meaning that we're like tabling it?
And the next, now
To
we
not
need to
discuss
bring
it
it, take it
today?
off the table for discussion. Yes, Mrs. Oden?
What we usually do is put it on the table at the end of the meeting,
To
and then we take it off the table at the next meeting.
Yes, but it has not yet been, we don't have it yet technically. So Ms. Van
But if-
Twyver's motion is intended to bring it to the board. When we're done with it tonight, it would be a matter of putting it back on the table as you're suggesting, and then picking it up the next meeting to resume.
What I don't think we need are the words to put it on the table in the motion. I think accepting it, we have it, and at the end of the meeting tonight, then we put it on the table. And at the next meeting, the next budget meeting, we take it off the table and do whatever we want and put it on the table or pass it or whatever.
That was my first motion.
Yeah, it was. Okay.
Okay, so may I ask Ms. O'Hensey,
Revert to the first.
well, just withdraw your
Draw and start over.
start over. Is that
Okay,
okay,
once
Ms. Van
more.
Twyver?
I move to accept the proposed superintendent's budget for 2019.
Second.
Accept.
Can I make a motion?
Well, we still have to vote.
We have to vote to accept.
Yes.
Okay.
Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Guarino, let's do roll call, please, since even though we're all here, let's do a roll call.
Okay, the motion is to accept the superintendent's budget for 2019. Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensie,
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. The motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Ms. Hohensie.
I'd like to move to take 28,000 in savings from the line item error that was found at the last meeting in the budget book for Adam Marcous's salary and add it to the substitute loyalty program that Mr. Donovan proposed at a recent budget committee meeting.
Second.
Speaking
Ms. Hohensie, would you please care to speak to it?
Yeah, when Mrs. Johnson was here and discussed it, we found that we had this $28,000 error, and that money is not, it's in the budget, but it's not allocated. And I thought we would take that money and allocate it for our substitute loyalty program, because we have, at any one time, 2/3 the number of substitutes we have. This loyalty program would up the salary for a substitute by $10 after they put 20 days into the district. So they have their commitment to our district, and we show our commitment to them. So I thought it was a good way to try to get more substitutes into our district and be competitive, like we talk about our teachers' salaries being competitive. We need to be a little bit competitive on our substitutes.
Okay, this substitute loyalty program has been in existence, or is it brand new? Mr.
brand new.
Donovan?
This is something new. We discussed it at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think.
So by doing this, we will be establishing a substitute loyalty program which ups the salary of a substitute by $10 if after what period? Did we say?
Yeah, well, I think we need, if funds are put in, then we can get the language exactly, but it was approximately after they've worked 20 times in the
20
district in that year, they would get a $10 increase.
So this would have to come to the HR committee for them to draft this substitute loyalty program?
One of the committees, I guess, would approve it, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Raymond and Mr. Guarino.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I just want to be clear that if we make a vote for Mrs. Hohensie's proposal, we're simply moving that money. We're not saying that the substitute loyalty program will in fact be $10, or because I think we talked about $5, or we had some discussion where I don't think we resolved what the program would look like specifically. So now I'm confused. So I would like a little bit more clarification about whether or not this vote simply sets up the discussion to have the substitute loyalty program, or if it in fact will be then now we have this and we're locked into it. And then secondly, I'm a little bit confused about the salary error, because when I was reading the minutes, and I think maybe I read them wrong, I thought it was the union that was paying him that difference, or did I read it incorrectly?
So if I can interject, I think I defer to Mr. Donovan to speak to both things, if you could do the
Yes,
program setup itself.
there is an error in the budget. Mr. Marcoux was listed in the budget as a fifth grade teacher. He's actually on leave. So the person that's taking his place should be in there. It was done correctly last year. This year, so for example, his salary is approximately $75,000. The person taking his place is about $45,000. So this would adjust that error, so that $28,000. I think it's actually slightly more than that, but $28,000 is reasonably close. And the substitute loyalty program, yes, the way I would see is the funds would be put into the program, and then we would need to define the program better. I don't think we're defining, 20 times and $10. It could be 15 times and $6. It could be whatever.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure whether or not that would end the discussion or if it would be more discussion, because I like the program, but I'd like more before we finalize it.
Ms. Raymond, are you, you're good with your questions? Have they been answered?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Guarino, Mrs. Oden, and then Ms. Van Twyver.
I just want to ask, through the chair, Mr. Donovan, that $28,000 error, that was done in the proposed budget, the 2019 budget, or was it done in the previous?
No, it was in the 2019 budget.
So it was in the one, okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
It was a one-time error, if we can call it that. Mrs. Oden?
Thank you. I have a question. That $28,000, would that be enough to bring us through a full year? I wouldn't want to end up saying, you know, we have this $28,000, you know, we can use it until March, and after that, we won't have enough money to pay that added bonus?
Well, what we would need to do, and that's why we would need to take a look, I've already got some numbers together, is to take a look at how many people, for example, this year have worked more than 20 times. So using this year's experience, we could then extrapolate the numbers to see if 28,000 makes sense. And if you're going to use, I guess the key is, are you going to use 20 times, or is it going to be 15, or is it going to be 25? You can move that number around, or you can move the $10, make it 12, make it 8. So you have a play on a couple of sides, and it might turn out to be around that. If we budgeted that, we could make it come out to that or as close to that as we would like.
Okay, thank you.
Are you all set, Ms. Oden? Ms. Van Twyver?
Getting back to establishing this program, in your past work, has it been the HR committee or finance and ops that would establish the ins and outs of the program?
You could do it at either. I'd be more than happy to do it at finance and ops, but if you think it's an HR thing, it really doesn't.
It doesn't matter to me.
Doesn't matter to me.
As long as it gets done.
Yes. I think it's one that could go between committees, so whichever committee would like to take it up.
Any other comments on this? Mrs. Oden?
I would just say, I will not support the motion tonight until we see the exact figures of how it's going to affect the loyalty program, how much each day we can contribute to that fund after you looked at the figures from this year. I think it's a good investment. How many substitutes are in that loyalty program? All of them, or is that the 4 that we've hired at each high school?
No, this would be a new program.
Okay.
That we would start next year, and any sub, if we use 20 times, any sub that sub 20 times could be in the program.
Okay, thank you.
If I may comment, since other people have commented, this mirrors in several ways, not exactly what they do in Merrimack. So when we talk about comparing salaries for teachers, which has always been a big discussion and consideration in the negotiation committees, how do we compare regionally? I'll just put it that way. We have the same discussion here for substitute teachers. So Merrimack has a similar structure to that Mr. Donovan's initial analysis addressed, which is $65 a day. After the 20 days, they go to $75. And I will say that, just so you know, once you qualify for that $20 a day in, say, FY19, you retain that $75 rate the following year if you join us. So it doesn't have to be, they don't lose ground by coming back the following year. So that's just how that works in Merrimack. Mrs. Hohensee.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, could you tell us where in the book you gave us that information? Because you did delineate it and put different costs and...
Yeah, I'll have to look.
I have that, actually. I put it in section 2. It's my very last page, because that's where we were when we were talking about it.
Thank you, Mrs. Raymond. So just for informational purposes,
Thank you.
Frame, did you notice that we're on, what is it, Price is Right? So, but just so you know, in the larger scope of the budget, if you're looking in tab 1 and you look at that two-sheet summary with all the codes, commodity codes, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one down, 51412, which is wages per diem. So the substitute teachers fall into, that's where they're paid out of. So that's where that number would go to, just so you know. And if you notice, if you go far to the right on that line, there's only a very modest $2,000 currently, $2,000 increase currently proposed. So we're talking about adding about, what was it, $28,000 to this specific line item. Any other, well, Ms. Hohensee?
Okay, I'm looking at the page, and he does say that it was 25,000 was the annualized cost. It assumes that 70 substitutes make it to the loyalty program, and it was 67 for the first 20 days and 77 for the days thereafter. And this is a couple thousand more. If I just want to allocate the money that's unallocated in our budget, and if we have to hone it down as we work it through, but I think putting this money towards that goal with these numbers that he projected is a good first step, and then take it to committee after the budget's approved and make what use we can of that 28,000, because I'm sure it would be constructive in some way to make our district more competitive. I don't think kids, I mean, 1/3 of the empty classrooms are not being, of the teachers that are gone, we don't get substitutes. We get 2/3 the number we need on an average day. So that, we need to address that problem.
Ms. Raymond?
Thank you. I'd just like to say I cannot agree more with doing something about our substitute teacher I'm going to call it a problem, but because we need more, and it's kind of a mess. But I do have a question just for my own information. If we, for example, did not allocate this $28,000 to substitutes, does it just hang out? Like, where does it go?
So let me answer that. Then it could be allocated to anything else. So right now it's sitting there. It's potentially available to anything. I think is that a fair statement, Mr. Donovan?
Yes, you can allocate it to anything. If you
Or
did
not spend
nothing
it.
with it, then it would just be extra money that maybe I could use to pay out of district tuition or whatever. But yeah, if it's not specifically allocated, it would be available, or it would be extra at the end of the year.
Okay. Ms. Hohensee, did you have your hand up again?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on this particular item?
So I have one more question.
Is that a yes?
That's a yes. Thanks. And I guess my question then is, do we have any, this is a very thick book, but do we have any information from administration about their priorities for, I'm going to call it an extra $28,000 that was discovered last week?
I choose not to speak for the superintendent, so I guess the answer to that would be not at this time.
So the other part of that is this was a discussion. Mr. Donovan, help me remember, was it around October of last year? You and Ms. McGarrett made a presentation to, I forget which committee it was. I don't think it was the...
It was the Finance...
It was at the
and
Finance
Operations
Committee, where this was brought up as an important concern of the administration, and it was something that at the time was spoken of that we really wanted to address it going forward. So
Yeah,
I think it's inappropriate. I think it's important that we address this. To Ms. Hohensee's point, 1/3 of our substitute teacher needs on a daily basis are unfulfilled. So what does that mean to a classroom? It means that another teacher is getting kids added to their class to cover the supervision of those children. Sometimes what happens is you might get 2 subs pooled together and put in an auditorium, maybe fill this room up with all the kids, and what happens is there really is no instruction occurring. And I can tell you as a substitute teacher, here in this district and currently still in Merrimack, the kids need supervision if they're going to get any work done. And if they were put in a room like this, say 2 classes or even 3 classes that are merged, 3 different subjects, you're just really watching them, and hopefully they don't, hopefully they just stay focused on their phones.
Didn't we used to call that study hall?
Yes, except now it's the phone, and I will say, though, I have seen some students in Merrimack read books during study hall. There's a few of them. The rest are on their phones. Any other, Mrs. Oden?
I was going to say, one of my concerns is we had a very, very nice CTE presentation, and I think everybody in the room was interested in the machining program and getting that going again for our students. We don't have a teacher for that in the budget. And for me, that along with substitutes, that's a very high priority. So I just think at this point, I'd like a little bit more time to see where we could possibly find money for a teacher for the machining program, if we can get that going again. If there's $25,000 in the budget for the substitutes at this point for the loyalty program, I'd like to hold off on that decision so that we make sure we have a machining teacher if we can get that program running.
Mrs. Hohensee?
Thank you. I too share your interest in the machining program. I talked to some of the CTE teachers, one of whom that might have been asked to help run it if they got it up and going. And he expressed to me that he wouldn't want to take that job as the single teacher in that room because there is so much equipment, and there's like a back room and a front room. He says it wouldn't be safe. You're going to need, it's an expensive course to run, and his suggestion was you'll need more than one teacher. So that is an interesting project, but I don't think this amount would solve that problem. That would take another whole discussion. I mean, to figure out how to safely run that class and make sure there's enough assistants or teachers or something going around to make sure that the students would be safe. That was my concern.
Ms. Raymond?
All right, one last
Raymond.
one. Is this only for teachers and not paras? Because I know we have a very large need for para substitutes as well.
Let me take a stab at that. I think they're paid out of the same budget line, are they not, Mr. Donovan?
They are, but I think the numbers that I used to come up with that 25,000 were just teachers.
Okay, so that's something that the committee that would eventually iron out the details would determine. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Guarino, were you putting your hand up? I wasn't sure.
I just want to say that I agree with Mrs. Oden, that I think it's a little premature, even though it may not pay for a whole teacher for that CTE program. It could contribute towards that end, and I think that that would be more of my priority, would be getting that CTE program up and running. I think that should be a priority of the board.
Well, I will point out that it was not a priority of the administration because they did not include it in the budget. So just going to point that out, flat out. And Ms. Santarvis, is that hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I would think it would take more than a year to establish that program, wouldn't it? I don't remember how long it took us to do some of the others.
Well, there was a discussion that has taken place. Ms. Bastoni has been looking for someone to take this role. My understanding, I didn't speak to her personally, but my understanding is there is a person interested in taking on that role. Mm-hmm. There was a question by the board, which I'll probably give the official piece of paper at the next meeting, but it was what would be the cost to bring the machines up. Most of the cost to bring the machines up will be borne by the Perkins grant, which is the good news. That could be about 25, 26,000, but the Perkins grant can take care of that. And then there was another couple $1,000s, which could be handled by the allocation the CTE program is currently giving. So we'd really need to hear from maybe the superintendent or Ms. Bastoni, but I think they may have found this person. I believe they have interested students. It would probably only be one section of it, but it's a possibility it could run next year.
So,
Just
Mr.
from what
Donovan, if we do not allocate headcount, teaching position for that, how could you run it? That would mean
Well,
another
it-
teacher wouldn't teach some other course that we planned for, or a teacher would be reallocated to do it, or?
Possibly, yes. I mean, think of this year, we added I think it was a first grade teacher at one of the elementary schools because of the large class size. That wasn't in the budget. We made an adjustment to a couple of other accounts so that we could get that teacher in because that was a top priority.
Okay, so if we were to follow that example, I remember now, didn't we add 2 teachers at one point, and you came back with us with a very specific, except this line item for this teaching position?
Exactly.
So if the administration really wanted this position and found that's all based on student demand, right? You don't run courses if you don't have demand. That's what we've heard before.
True, but I think they lost the teacher a couple of years ago and they hadn't been able to find one. I think the reason this hasn't run is because of a lack of a teacher more than anything else.
Okay, so I would say if the administration determined that A, it had an instructor, and B, it had student demand, that C, they would come back to the board and say, we've got the kids, we've got the instructor, we want to start the program, and that would be a clean way of reinvigorating this program because those factors would be in place. The thing about the substitutes, that's been hanging around for a long, long time. And again, I encourage you to hang out in the cafeteria here, well, especially at Elm Street was my least favorite cafeteria. But if you want to understand why substitutes or lunch monitors or why adult supervision is required, especially when teachers are out of the building for, it could be a personal day, it could be a training day, personal development. There's lots of reasons that teachers have excused absences. So, Ms. Van Twyver.
Okay, now I'm torn between these two things. And the Perkins grants is 26,000, and then we have this 28,000 that we're thinking about. But that wouldn't buy a teacher's salary, 28,000, would it? For this type of course? I think it's important that we do something to get substitute teachers in here so these kids aren't sitting unattended or not doing productive work. Now, it's okay that they can be in a study hall, but, I just think we've got to do something about get some substitutes. Can't ask one person to take care of 100 kids or something. I don't know. But I'm just torn between this now because I believe that the CTE program is very important in today's day and age. We've had them, manufacturers, companies looking for more people and we need to educate them that way. But I don't know that $28,000 would do it, but I would like to see us do something with the substitute teachers so that these kids aren't sitting by themselves making mayhem.
Ms. Hohensee.
Since I've been on the board, I think that the substitutes went from 65 to 67,000.
$.
No, dollars, excuse me, not 1,000, per day.
True.
So it's $2 increase over 3 years, 3 budgets that I've, worked on. And this 2,000 that we're giving towards it is nickels, it's cents. It's not even $1 increase for each teacher. Each substitute teacher per day. But I just think it's a small drop in the bucket in terms of our whole overall budget. There's other money in other places that we can look for to resolve that machinist problem, and I think everybody on the board wants it. This is an issue that that was presented to us, and it can be fleshed out. But we had an initial estimate after, studying it of 25,666.67. So 28,000 would go a good way to solve this problem, and then we can look to figure out the other problem, which we don't even know the scope of. Perhaps next week when Dr. Mosley's back, we'll figure out what we need to get the machinist program back up and running.
Okay, I think we've I'll just ask one more time. Okay, is that a hand, Ms. Raymond? I need hands, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm wondering if we should table it till we can talk to Dr. Mosley then, because that would answer the question of whether or not, because you said we could talk to Dr. Mosley next week about the machinist. Well, maybe we should table moving this money until he's back. And then that would perhaps put Mrs. Van Twyver's mind at ease and mine as well, as far as being torn between, I want to do something very much about the substitutes. I cannot agree more that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But now I'm also questioning getting that other program running and wondering, like, if we allocate this money now, will we not have enough to do the other one? We've talked ourselves around where now I'm like, So I'm wondering if we should wait until we have Dr. Mosley to answer the questions.
I will
Ms.
second
Hohensee.
that table.
Wait, there's no motion here, please.
Did you make a motion? I thought you said table it.
She spoke of discussion. Please address the chair.
Sorry, I was
Ms.
speaking
Raymond
to
was
a
speaking
discussion
to an
about it.
idea.
Okay, I
Yes.
thought she
There was no
I thought she
motion.
wanted to table it.
Ms. Hohensee?
Thank you. There is more money in the budget to move around. This isn't the only place. I found, several other places that we can release money for projects. If you're going to do that, then you might as well shut down the meeting if we don't want to move any money around. I mean, that's what the budget committee does. I mean, it looks at the budget and says it's better to take this money and put it there. This money doesn't have an allocation, and it fits the bill of the proposal, and it would resolve that, and we can move on to the next issue, one of which is the machine shop.
Mr. Guarino?
I make a motion to table this until next time.
Second.
I'll introduce discussion on this motion. This is what the purpose of these budget deliberations is. And you could legitimately, every proposal that gets made, you could legitimately table it. No, but realistically, everything is usually a viable, valid recommendation to change the budget. And, okay, well, let's, anybody else want to comment on the motion to table?
It's non-debatable.
Anybody want, oh, it's non-debatable? Sorry. Okay, call your vote, please. Roll call.
On the motion to table the motion, Mrs. Oden?
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman?
No.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Ms. Hohensee?
No.
Ms. Van Twyver?
No.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. It's 3-3. I guess it's
It fails.
fails.
So the motion to table fails 3-3. So back, I think it's time to vote on the original motion. I think we've had a good, productive conversation, but I think it's time to call the vote on the original motion for the substitute loyalty program.
There's
Is there
no,
a comment there, Ms.
yeah.
Van Twyver?
If I could, is there any reason why if we decide later on that maybe this money should be used for something else, if we voted for it today, couldn't that happen?
Well, in my recollection, and I'd ask Mr. Donovan to jump in if I get this wrong, is every motion we put forward can be modified by a subsequent motion. Nothing is cast in concrete until we're at the end and the board votes to accept the whole budget. Is that
That'd
a
be
fair
correct.
statement?
You could agree on a motion tonight, and then 2 weeks from now, reverse it completely, reverse it in half. You can make any motions you'd like to move money around.
So there's nothing cast in concrete through these votes at this point in time. It just moves the discussion further along. Ms. Van Twyver, did you want to follow up on that?
I was just going to say that if we get the motions out on the floor, then we know what we're talking about, and we might have more time to investigate, negotiate, or whatever.
Ms. Raymond, I thought I saw a hand that might be going up that time.
No, thank you. I was pressing a button in preparation.
Okay. So with that, I'd like to, can I make the request to call the question?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I'd like to do that.
Okay, on Ms. Hohensy's motion to move the $28,000 into the substitute loyalty program, Mrs. Oden,
No?
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensy,
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Yes?
Mr. Guarino votes no. The motion carries 4-2.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Hohensy.
I would like to move $10,000 from the board's contract services line item to pay for 3 small programs. $2,500 for a video storage system described in previous meetings by Mr. Kaufman. $4,000 for athletic stipends recommended by Mrs. Gingras. And $3,500 for stipends for non-athletic extracurricular activities, including a debate team at North that could compete with the debate team at South. North does not have a debate team. If I get a second, I'll speak to my motion.
Second?
I think we spend a lot of money in athletics, and athletics is great. I've talked to teachers and parents and said that a lot of our other extracurriculars are more academic extracurriculars, like the debate or the math team. They don't always have stipends, and this doesn't allocate where it is, and it's only $3.5 thousand. But maybe we could spread out some of the money. Maybe could be divided up between the 2 high schools, and the principals could figure out how. They'd have a meeting together and make it equitable. But it's like a one-time stipends, or at least to try this idea out to see if we can show appreciation to these people that are working with our kids after school hours, the way we appreciate all the coaches and assistant coaches for athletics.
Ms. Van Twyver, then Mr. Guarino.
Could you repeat the figures? The first one I missed. It's $10,000 from the contract services to, and then I missed the,
Okay, I think in our budget, we had $10,000 last year that went to the Ask Me appeal at the Supreme Court level. And it's in the budget, it was carried straight over. So we are not appealing in the Supreme Court, as far as I know, this year. So I want to take that $10,000 and divide it into 3 pieces. $2,500 for video storage, $4,000 for stipends recommended by Mrs. Gingras. I think they were middle school, I'm not sure.
I honestly don't,
I don't remember, I thought they were middle school, but I'm not positive. She knows what she recommended, that was her number, and $3,500 for stipends for non-athletic extracurricular coaches, or whatever we call them.
but you're not suggesting which ones? You
No,
mentioned the
other than
debate team.
I would encourage us to have a debate team at North and South. We have one, if you're in North, you get to go to, I think, a UN team. If you're in South, you can get a debate team. South doesn't have a UN team. So and you can't bus down and go to the other one. And I think at North, the woman who's managing the UN team is also on the side, volunteering her time to do debate. And I don't know if she's taking the kids to debates, but she's very involved. And I just think either she or someone else should get a debate team. I think those are critical for a high school.
But it's not your intent to specify the exact club that this non-athletic
No.
stipend should go to?
Nor the amounts,
Nor the amounts.
correct.
just the overall amount.
Yeah, and I'm just, overall amounts, $3,500, which isn't big in our $1 million budgets. and just encouraging them to do a debate. If they can't do it, so be it. That was the motivation that got it started.
Mr. Guarino, did you, I don't, Ms. Oden?
I was just going to ask Mr. Donovan, do you know if the debate coach at South gets a stipend?
Be listed in our book.
I'm not 100% sure if they do. There, as far as stipends for non-curricular, there is in the teacher's contract. At the back of the contract, there's a list of stipends for coaches, and there are for what we call co-curricular activities. If a debate coach would be listed there if they're receiving a stipend. So I don't have the contract book with me, but that's where it would be. I guess the one thing that you'd have to be a little cautious about here is if you're just putting more money in the budget for stipends, they would probably need to mirror the ones in the contract.
Yes.
I guess, for some reason, I remember asking about that in past years, and if I remember correctly, they couldn't find anybody to coach the debate team. They were having a hard time finding people to do it. So I think there might be a stipend for it.
If I may address, I recall being at graduation, high school, the school graduation 2 years ago, and speaking with a teacher, and she had a club but did not get a stipend. And it was a non-athletic, it was more academic focused. So I think this is intended to acknowledge the work that a lot of teachers are already doing, that the contract itself doesn't account for them getting a stipend, but they are doing the work, they made the commitments to the students, they take them on the trips, they're all in, and they're benefiting our students. I think this is intended to acknowledge that contribution and reward it. So I would support this. Let me go over there. Okay, so Mr. Guarino and then Ms. Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about the video storage, what that money is used for and what videos are being stored. And the other comment I wanted to make was that I remember Ms. Gingras said that our stipends for athletics are one of the lowest in the state. So, if we already have debate teams and they're already getting that, I'm not in favor of moving that money to a new debate team if they're already doing that.
1 second, please. Let me respond to the first part of your question about the video. It would be for board meetings, committee meetings, any meeting of the Board of Ed. I'll just say it that way. Anything that's public, any board meeting, any video that gets recorded would be essentially archived. Right now, it's not formally archived. They get pushed out to YouTube, but I think even Ms. Van Twyver might remember last year they changed providers, so all the previous years of video were lost. And there was no attempt, they didn't even they told us it was going to change, but the board, nobody made any attempt to try and preserve that video record. So this is an attempt to preserve the video record for the future. Not everybody likes to read through a transcript or can listen to an audio file, given the, video is such a compelling medium that it's a lot easier to watch the video than it is to find it, the transcript and trudge through it. And I did write down as something to look into, being the status of the debate club stipends, or I'll make it even further and say non-athletic stipends, if that's the meaning of what we were curious about, right? Mrs. We're going. Okay.
She was next.
Is it Ms. Raymond? Okay.
Thanks. So I have some more questions about the video storage, which I'm not opposed to, but I'm curious about the particulars about how this works. Do we then have to make our own videos? Do we have to get the ETV to send them to us? Do we need staff to be in charge of that? Those kinds of questions. Are there copyright? Because I don't know, do we own our own videos? Does local access own the videos? Like, how has any of this been discussed or ironed out before we start talking money?
There has been some email discussion around it. Essentially, the ETV people, so the money in question would be used to purchase disk drives to hold the content. Okay, that's what the money is for, is the physical disk drives that would hold it. The video would be continued to be recorded by the community television folks. It's a matter of Mr. Fahrenkopf giving access to the community television folks the ability to copy their video onto our equipment. So the people are already in place. There's no cost associated with additional personnel, which I think was maybe part of the question that you had. It's just a matter of them copying it to a second place beyond what they normally do. Yes.
And then is it your intention with this money to simply have them like sitting in a room someplace, or would it be also accessible via our website, or are we still going to just stick with YouTube and then we have ours kind of like sitting in like our server room or something?
So if you were to ask my opinion of what I want, it's in line with what you were alluding to, that they would also be available from the website. As you know, when we have board proceedings, then you'd have access to the video just like you'd have access to the current things, the minutes and the audio file. So that's what I would envision. That I would argue still needs to be worked out, and I don't know what the impact may or may not be on resources in the district to do that. First thing we need to do is grab them. It's very easy to go back and create a web page and point to them. That's not a big deal. Our high school students could do that for a project, piece of cake. It's not hard to do.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have your hand up, Ms. Van Twyver?
Oh, I have a lot to say about this.
Oh, so that's an answer. Okay, that's a yes. Okay, thank you.
Right. If you ever have to do any research, you don't want to on things that have transpired in the past. You don't want to sit and read pages and pages. You don't want to listen to an audio tape. It takes too long. If you remember a certain specific time of something happening with a video, you can go fast forward and go right to that spot. So the problem was that when they changed suppliers for the technology to record, we lost maybe 2 or 3 years worth of videotapes. Now, I don't know that we need $2,500 worth of storage. I think you could probably put it on a zip drive. But the fact of the matter is that we, even if, I believe they told me that they would only save 1 year's worth of videotapes. However, there are videos from way back, athletic stuff that's going. So there needs to be a certain period of time, say 2 years, because that's when the turnover on the board happens, that you have available to you online the ability to go back and check things that, particularly with policy, about what was said and who said and why we did certain things. While I think this I was really upset when this problem happened. I don't think that I can support this, though. If we have $10,000 that we can put somewhere else, I would prefer that it went to academic stuff. Maybe as part of the teachers for CTE that we want. So I can't support this, but I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Van Twyver. One second. Okay, Mr. Guarino, you've already. Thank you, Mr. Guarino. You've already spoken twice. I'll let Ms. Johansson and then yourself.
Thank you. I believe if you put it on a zip drive, the public can't have access. I think that was, the storage was so that you could have it and then it could be accessible online so you could view it. Having it and not making it accessible kind of defeats the purpose. I looked up, and Mrs. Gingras did ask for $4,000 for the middle school for stipends. The average stipend is like $1,200, $1,600. So if you're saying $3,500 for non-academics, you're talking 2 to 3 stipends, or they could divide it up for just materials that some of these people need for some of their groups and clubs that meet in the evening or in the afternoon. If you want to look at our budget, the stipends for athletics is $345,841. So this is like 1%. You're adding 1% to non-athletic stipends as to what athletics does. And I too remember the conversation after graduation, talking to people, teachers that volunteered and were really excited about their clubs, and they didn't have any money for any of the materials and things they were using or needed. So I just thought this was a small amount of money, and it hits, you know, the request that Ms. Gingrich made, the concern about loss of video and still making it accessible, and a little bit for those non-athletic endeavors that I think that are routinely ignored.
Mr. Guarino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Ms. Van Twyver. I think that we're going to run up into some other priorities later on, so I'm not going to support this.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Donovan, contract services, how do we usually run with that? Do we, the attorney is in there,
Well, actually, the attorney's in legal expenses.
oh, legal, okay.
Yes.
So what's in the contract?
I was supposed to look this up, and I didn't. This is possibly the school board association.
No,
The amount we put in for the school board association.
That's in a
may be
different
that.
line item.
No.
that's it.
No,
That's in the
we haven't been a
26,000.
member.
For
Or is that in
memberships.
dues and memberships?
Yes.
Yeah, I honestly, Mrs. Hohensee asked me about this 10,000. I don't know off the top of my head what it is. It's, I know the line item, it's in 0153628, it's on the first page. I just
I
don't,
told you he had it all in his head.
but I can't remember what it's there, because it was not budgeted in 17,
Correct.
so. But the legal that we spent last year, that would have been charged to legal, not contracted services, because it was a legal bill.
Right, because that's on the net, that's under administrative offices. We have legal services, it was 40,000 last year, 50,000 this year. I remember that. That was a contract. And this, the only thing under school board services that I remember that was $10,000, and it has to be in last year's budget somewhere because we spent it, was that ASME appeal.
Right, but that's in
Supreme-
legal. I'm telling you, that.
That too would
10
be in legal?
Yes, it was a legal bill, so it would have been charged to legal.
But it's not in there because we went from 40 to 50,000. It should have been 40,000 plus the 10
The 40
extra.
was, 40 is this year's budget.
Right, that's
50 is what we're proposing for next year's budget.
Right.
The 10,000 was in fiscal year 17, not 18.
That's right.
okay.
So, Ms. Van Twyver and Mr. Guarino.
I just want to make a correction to your statement about zip drives. Zip drives can be online. All you have to do is plug them into a USB port and leave them there, so.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll withdraw my motion if it's not, that's not the amount. I was pretty certain that it was in last year's budget, so I don't want to take money until I'll move to table it till we find out what it is.
I think that would be a good idea.
Right, because the other numbers kind of matched up and that stood out, but if it's not that, I don't want to move the money around.
So there's a motion to table. I'll second that.
Can we do a voice vote and get it over with?
Sure. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion is to table. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? I didn't hear everybody vote, though, so I only I didn't see Mrs. Oden. Did you vote?
Did you hear a no?
So you're okay, you're okay.
Okay, fine. Passes unanimously. Mrs. Hohensee.
I would like to move to eliminate 2 IT positions that were vacated by Kathy Wild and Ron Bovair, and use that money to add $70,000 to the budget for the Discovery Education curriculum software. And I'd like to speak to my motion if I get a second.
Second.
These 2 positions were vacated this year. I don't think we will get replacements. And if that's the case, I thought we get rid of the positions themselves and put into the Discovery software that was so well liked by teachers. I think there would be some money left over because I'm not sure. I know what Kathy Wild's salary, one of them was, and I don't know what the other one was. But it's certainly enough to cover the $70,000 for the software.
Ms. Van Tarver, are you finished?
Yeah.
Ms. Van Tarver, you second. Did you want to speak to it? Anyone wish to speak to this motion? Mrs. Oden?
I was one of the people who asked that this meeting not be held because Dr. Mosley would not be here. I would just like to hear from Dr. Mosley what he is looking at for a data person, what he's looking for in that. I don't know what his thinking is at this point, and I'd like to leave that money there should he want to hire another data person or whatever he's looking to do. If he's looking to replace 1 or 2 of those people, and I think we owe it to him as the superintendent. This is his budget, and I would be reluctant to take that out and put it elsewhere. I think Discovery Education is a great program, but I think I'd like to hear from the superintendent before we do that.
Anybody else have a comment? Ms. Van Tarver?
Yeah, I do. It seems to me that if this $70,000 was known that we had it, why it wouldn't have been mentioned that he wanted to hire somebody to replace them. That's $70,000, a lot of money. There's 70 plus 10 is 80,000 that could go towards our CTE teacher. But I'm willing to table this till Dr. Mosley comes back.
I'll move to table it.
Second.
Did you get that, Mr. Guarino?
Voice vote.
So, voice vote, move to table. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No, carries. Voice 6-0. Mrs. Hohensee, she's on a roll.
Move to eliminate iReady from grades 1 and 2 and use the money to fund another TIA position for, per the recommendation of Assistant Superintendent McKinney in a curriculum meeting on December 18th last year, page 5 in the minutes. And I'd like to speak to my motion if I get a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, the iReady costs somewhere between $75,000 and $80,000 a year. Divide that by 8 grades, it's $9,000 or $10,000. So that 2 grades, that would give you $18,000 to $20,000, and that covers what a TA position usually runs. This is a testing that's done 3 times a year, and in grades 1 and 2, I don't think that it's necessary. I think less testing and less testing prep time gives more class time. This is where you want to learn. You don't need to start testing how much you've learned right out of the box. I think we had a discussion at Finance Committee on Tuesday, and it was understood that, it was a brief discussion, but that the teachers know how these kids are doing in those grades. And the kids can get very upset, they can cry over these assessments. Studies have also shown that if we use some of this time for more recess, if you play harder, you learn better, especially boys. So I would rather they had more class time and a little bit more recess and save the money, get a TIA position in there that we talked about in December that we needed. I just think this kind of fits because the TIAs are, that go in on that level, the elementary school.
Mr. Guarino, I'm sorry. Mr. Guarino.
Thank you. Yeah, that discussion that we had at the Finance and Operations, we were talking a little bit about assessment. However, iReady covers math. The assessment that Dr. McKinney had described at the Curriculum Committee was not actually a test for children. It was an evaluation by teachers of children at reading levels. So they're totally different things. You can't substitute one for the other. And I think I think we're way overstepping ourselves here. We're getting into, before we eliminate iReady, I think we need Dr. McKinney's input on this. So I think this is, I would not be in favor of this at all.
Let me just, for clarification, it was to eliminate iReady in grades 1 and 2. It was not to eliminate iReady. No, just because if someone gets it out of context, I just as soon have the clarification with it. Ms. Van Twyver.
Thank you. If you eliminate iReady in grades 1 and 2, I trust that you will not understand how the growth of the child goes and where the problems might be, that the iReady program can hone in on the specific concepts that these children are missing so that by the time they get to grade 3 that maybe they've been corrected and they've been educated further on those particular subjects. I will not vote for this.
If I may just observe, I think one of the reasons why I would be in favor of this was, one of the things was Mrs. Oden's comment the other night when she was asked about this, when she said some of the kids cry when they take this test. They're really overwhelmed by it. And secondly, with the loss of Kathy Wild being our analyst and specialist on iReady data, I just don't see that being picked up and carried forward. I haven't heard a lot of support for iReady from the administration in the last 6 months. And so I think this was kind of in conjunction with the other motion where knowing the resource was no longer available and the analysis, at least for the early grades, could possibly be reduced. Ms. Van Twyver?
No, these two ladies over
Oh,
here need
okay.
to speak.
Hold on a second. Oh, okay, neither of you have spoken, so just, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you. I'm also opposed to eliminating iReady for specific grades. I think that it provides a continuum of data over a child's educational process. I think it also allows for teachers, especially when you're going from grade 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, it helps our teachers when they're deciding which classrooms to place kids in. It really helps them to decide who needs to go where and make sure that they have balanced classrooms that will meet all of the kids' needs. I'm also unsure of how helpful a single TIA position will be for an entire district of 12 elementary schools. So I'm opposed to this right now.
So if I can respond, as far as the TIA position, the recommendation for the increase in headcount came from Dr. McKinney in a conversation that we had. And we can certainly follow through with him to get more information. I think we want to do our due diligence on things. So in terms of that, I would agree. And I would be, well, I can't make a motion to table as the chair, but I think there's two aspects to this. One is I would like to determine from the administration their commitment to iReady, and before I would even make a decision on eliminating it. I think we need to know that. And to the second point about the TIA, those folks, they're in this little bubble. They're in front of children all day. They teach all day. The only thing they don't do is establish the curriculum that they teach. For all other intents and purposes, they are teachers. Yet they're not part of the teachers' union contract. So adequate staffing sometimes gets, it's not as prevalent as noticing, gee, we're missing a teacher. And these are the folks, these TIAs, if I'm not mistaken, are dedicated to the elementary schools for teaching technology-related things. They don't really do, that's their specialty, that's their wheelhouse. So I'll just make that point. And Mrs. Oden,
Okay, thank you.
sorry.
You know, I have heard from teachers that students cry, and I would like to clarify, it wasn't at the Finance Committee per se, it was before the Finance Committee. So if you look at the Finance Committee, that conversation is not there. You had asked me when I came before the meeting. But I have heard from many first grade teachers and some second grade teachers that it really doesn't tell them a whole lot that they don't know. But I haven't talked to every teacher in the district, and I think all teachers ought to, I think administration ought to look for feedback from all teachers, not just a few. So I would not support this at this point. I think it's more an administrative decision, and I think they need to touch base with their teachers to make sure that it's not a waste of money. Yeah, we eliminated from kindergarten. I know kindergarten doesn't do it. I think it's up to administration, Dr. McKinney, Dr. Mosley, to look at that and see what they think. So I will not vote to eliminate the money for that at this point.
Mrs. Hohensee.
I will move the table. I would just like to make 2 quick points for clarification. The SBAC, the statewide test, starts in 3rd grade. They don't believe in testing the little kids. I mean, they do repeat till they finally catch on by the 2nd or 3rd grade. And as Mrs. Oden pointed out, we've already eliminated kindergarten in grade 9. Grade 9 with the logistics in the high school were impossible compared to an elementary school or middle school to get all the kids in for the test. So I'm happy to table this.
I'll second the table. I'm sorry. Okay. Voice vote? All in favor to
Aye.
table this?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, so I believe that's 1, 2, 4, 2 pass to table. Mrs. Hohensee.
I'd move to remove $50,000 from the budget for a school psychologist and add $13,000 for a school psychologist intern position. And I'd like to speak to it if I get a second.
Second for the purpose of conversation.
The mayor's budget, which is online, it's like 5 or 6 pages. He pointed this out. He made the recommendation. It saves $37,000. Also, we've had interns before at $13,000. So I think someone in his staff has been looking closely at our budget, and that intern was in last year. It is not in next year's budget. So there's no reason why we can't put another intern in there. Gives them the access to a big district, and it's a good learning place, and it saves us some money in the budget. So that's on the mayor's recommendation. I'd like to move that question. Oh, well, let you talk about it, but make a motion.
Mrs. Oden.
I cannot support this motion. Last year, there was a motion made to eliminate 4 psychologists. We got letters from students that were so touching, and the fact that the psychologists made such a difference in their lives. And everything that we're hearing from our schools, students are coming in with more problems, more serious problems. They need more support. Quite frankly, I don't think one psychologist in the budget is enough. I would like to see us add 2 or 3. We're hearing this from guidance counselors, we're hearing this from the psychologists. So I just cannot, I cannot support this at all.
Mr. Guarino, then Ms. Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mrs. Oden that we are barely, we barely have enough psychologists to cover the legal, I think the state requirement. There's like one psychologist for a couple of hundred students, or depending, so where you are. So we have a shortage of school psychologists, and this doesn't make any sense to me.
Thank you. An intern is not a psychologist. An intern is participating in their daily job for the purposes of learning, and they do so under the supervision of another more qualified person. For me, I would not expect an intern to have the clinical knowledge or experience to provide the services that a school psychologist would do. And I would also suggest that supervising an intern would cause an added burden to the psychologists that we already have, instead of relieving some of their burden by adding another fully trained staff member. And given the additional psychological needs of our kids that we've heard about a couple of times, even in the last couple of months, I just feel like this proposal, while it might make sense on paper, it does a disservice to our students and our staff, so I can't support it myself.
Any other comments from the board? Okay, let's have a vote. Roll call, please.
On the motion, Mrs. Oden?
No.
Well, could you please repeat the motion for the record?
I didn't actually catch the whole thing, but it's to remove 50,000 from the school psychologist and add a psychologist intern for, was it 35,000?
13,000.
13,000. Mrs. Oden is no. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Ms. Raymond?
No.
Ms. Hohensee?
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver?
No.
Mr. Guarino votes no. The motion fails 2-4.
Okay. Any, Mrs.
I have a
Hohensee?
question for Mr. Donovan. Do we have in our budget the climate survey for this year? We were supposed to do a second follow-up one.
I don't know.
Maybe we could have that for next week. I don't want to pressure you to.
Yeah, I'll
Go
look it up. I know where it was last year.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll check it out and get back.
Appreciate that.
Do we have any other motions to modify the budget tonight? Mrs. Hohensee?
Okay. I had a couple contingent on that last one because there was, savings of 37,000, but don't have that, so I have to skip around. I move to eliminate the Assistant Director of HR, 60,000, and add a full-time ELL at 50,000. This would be an additional ELL teacher. We've got 2 new ones in the proposed budget. Puts more funds in the classroom, not in the administration.
Second. Mrs. Hohensie, would you care to speak to it?
I'll speak later to it.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, Ms. Raymond?
Thank you. My heart is with the ELL students and teachers. I've been very, very clear about that, and I would love to find a way to give them more staff. But I don't think that this is the ideal way to do it. I think as hard of a worker and as Mrs. O'Gara is, there's more work there than one person could ever possibly keep up with, and I think that we have seen this, and I think that in order to streamline a lot of processes at the district level, we need an assistant there, and not the least of which is hiring staff and making sure that we have our openings posted timely, that they're accurate, that they're reviewed timely. This has been something that's been kind of an ongoing issue because she's so busy doing all sorts of other things that she's required to do. So I would very much love to find money for another ELL teacher, but I cannot support sacrificing more help in the HR department to do it right now.
Ms. Van Twyver, and then Mr. Raymond. I'm sorry, Mr. Guarino.
Mr. Donovan, didn't we hire somebody for HR, made him assistant to Ms. O'Gara a while ago?
We, couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, we upgraded one of the positions in the department to a supervisor, I believe is the position. So we did do that about 3 years ago.
Thank you.
Mr. Guarino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My sentiments are with Ms. Raymond. I think that it's trying to add to ELL is a good thing. However, you're taking from one department that's already stressed, and they're already shorthanded. And I think they used to have more people in HR than they have now. Actually, they're actually working now with less people than they've had before. To do it, it's just not the right way. So I can't support this.
Mrs. Oden, I'll ask, do you have a comment?
At one time, they did have an assistant there. They've cut back. They're finding it more difficult to have people working in HR who are trained. It's not a secretarial job, really. You've got to know a lot of law about the laws, the healthcare. It's very complicated, and what's happening, we just lost somebody from that department because they took a job elsewhere for $20,000 more. So as we train people, they move on to places that are looking for HR people. The department is running very, very lean. I've been there many nights after meetings, and Miss O'Gara is still there, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So I cannot support this.
I'd like to at least address this. I'm sensitive to, actually, when I spoke to Dr. Mosley, probably back in October, and maybe even before, and again in January, I recommended that the HR director get some help. So I'm very sensitive to the feeling of maybe too much to handle. And I appreciate what you said, Ms. Raymond, where you pointed out in your comment where a helper would help get essentially the procedures and things addressed. That's been a concern of mine for, let's see, in August it'll be 2 years, so however many months that is. So as much as I want an ELL teacher, and I do, the only way, quite frankly, and I'll be very honest with the board, the only way I don't support this motion is if I get an assurance from the administration that within some, if we were to bring on an assistant director, that one of those tasks will be to ensure that not only the HR administrative procedures are updated, but that all administrative procedures are updated and brought forward and made available online. That's the price of my vote for here. I'm just being very honest and candid about it. I'd rather see our money spent in the classroom. And if ELL is such a demand for the administration, they're asking for 2 teachers, I believe, in the current budget proposal. This is structured to provide a 3rd. Because when I asked Mr. Chopa, how many do you really want? He said 4. So this is a step toward what that department wants. Now, I have other comments about ELL that I can make at another time. So that's where my vote sits. Would I consider adding an extra person in HR? Yeah, but I want to make sure that the price of that includes all the HR procedures are updated within a specific period of time, and that the administration now, with that extra help, can get the other departments that, you know, are 9 months late in public commitments. I've been very, very patient, but I'm not that patient much more. Thank you. Ms. Van Twyver.
I have a lot of sympathy for Ms. O'Gara and her job, and she has been low employment rate over there. Could use a lot more help, but however, I believe that ELL is much more important. I think our students need the help, and we need to get them educated enough so that they get into the continuing spot. I think it's much more important, and I'll be voting for the ELL.
Ms. Hohensee, you haven't spoken yet.
I'd like to table it so that you can get your answer. There's no point voting on it tonight if you're waiting for an answer as to which way to go.
Second.
Voice vote okay, folks? The motion is to table Ms. Hohensee's motion about removing the assistant HR director position and replacing it with an ELL teacher. That's the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? This is a tabling motion.
Mrs. Oden's opposed.
5-1 passes. So this motion is tabled. Okay, assistant director. Mrs. Oden.
Could I suggest, we don't have a full complement here. We have 6 members, we don't have an odd number. We're tabling an awful lot of things. I see, in my mind, we're wasting a lot of time. I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's non-debatable, right? Ms. Van Twyver?
No, we can adjourn.
Pardon me?
We can adjourn, doesn't matter.
On the motion to adjourn, Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
No.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensee,
No?
Mr. Guarino votes yes. The motion carries.
What was the vote?
This is Van Twyver. I apologize.
Miss Van
Ms.
Twyver, please.
I apologize.
Thank you.
Ms.
I
Van Twyver.
vote to adjourn.
Ms. Van Twyver, yes. Mr. Guarino votes yes. The motion carries 4-2. I apologize. I'm tired.
I'd like to,
Did you mention the time?
8:15.
I'd like to remind,